Welcome.
All right, hello, good morning. I'm Catherine Willis with Delta Airlines and Noah with Northstar. So our talk today is about global friend circles. And we do have another fun slide after this one. There we go. So to set the scene, what we're doing at Delta Airlines, we have a core target customer that we focus on that is, not surprisingly, the frequent traveler. They're on our planes a lot. They fly for business. Many of them are in our SkyMiles loyalty program. And for many of them, they've been in that program for over 10 years. And so if we look at the old-fashioned brand funnel, what we focus on with those customers is really building preference, becoming their most preferred airline. And then a couple years ago, we then started to ask ourselves, what's happening at the top end of the funnel? Who are we building a brand affinity with now so that as they become more frequent travelers, we've built a strong relationship with them? So we started in the US to really understand who these new customers were. And many of them were in the millennial generation, which I know many of us work on to understand those customers very much, so we are as well. And so we really wanted to understand who they are as people, what are their travel preferences, what are their core needs. And we, as I said, we started in the US, but then we wanted to expand that to some of our key international markets. So we could really understand who those customers were there and make sure as we were developing products and services that we were meeting those customers' needs. So having worked with Northstar for many years all around the world, I went to them and I said, I gave them an open mandate. I said, we want to go in, it's going to be a qualitative approach, but what can we do to get to the next level down? What can we do to get deeper insight into who these customers are, what their core needs are? So I'll turn it over to Noah to walk through the approach.
Thanks, Catherine. Catherine came to us with this brief of approaching this evolving audience across the world and trying to get to access them differently. And for a working title, we've called it Friend Circles or Working with Friend Circles. But before we talk about the method, I'd quite like to walk you through the theoretical backstory that we have that informs this method. And as I do that, I need to thank our partners at the London School of Economics, the Department of Anthropology, and ourselves. We've been working closely over the last 2 years, refining social science-inspired methods. So our story starts with what we call the respondent evolution. And I think everybody in this room knows 25, 30 years ago, when you consider the respondent, you'd consider the respondent as a voice, right? It was sufficient for this respondent to be heard, the voice to be expressed, and our role was to get that and amplify back in the client context, in a boardroom, in a marketing. So we'd listen to people on doorsteps, in research facilities, but the setting there was still passive. Passive as in the respondent was in a passive role. In the second stage, in what we call the respondent evolution, we dial it up a bit. And this is happening about 15 years ago. There's a demand that, from client side, that it's not sufficient just to tell me what these people are saying. I want a ringside view to their lives. And then there's the genre of work, often referred to as commercial ethnography, which is about following people in their lives, shopping, going to the gym, hanging out with friends, and reporting back on the basis of that. But even that, in our mind, was again, the respondent was in a passive place, performing as an actor in the life which we were observing. So we were still observing. Now here we pause for breath. I think most of you have been at this conference over the last few days, yesterday and today. You've heard a plethora of stories about this phenomenon, this explosion of technology, which takes away from the old tricks of the trade. And this is where we start reconsidering things with the LSE, the partners of the LSE. So the obvious piece that we've talked about, and quite a lot of the organizations here will talk about, and quite rightly, is a physical manifestation of this change, which is how we collect data differently, whether it's through watches, phones, tablets, online, whatever. You know, the physical manifestation. At Northstar, we were interested in what impact this would have on the mind of the respondent, right? So because the respondent is fundamentally engaging with institution, brands, friends, everything differently. They're leaning in an active setting, constantly sharing their stories about their lives, loves, hopes, etc. And that's not a bad thing. That active setting is not a bad thing. So how do we reimagine the respondent in light of what's gone on there? This call to reimagine the respondent is what we call reimagining the respondent as an agent, or creating respondent agency. Again, this is inspired from anthropological fieldwork. So again, we are working with our partners at the LSE, and they say to us, when we go and do studies in cultures, we spend the initial part of our time in the field actually embedding ourselves with a couple of key respondents, create a certain type of access and transparency, bring them in, and what we find is there's a disproportionate return, because they then give us intimate access to a broader set of people. That's the kind of anthropology-inspired model. And we got thinking that, okay, so we need to use that template, given what has happened in the evolving role of the respondent, and put it into place for Delta. And as Catherine said, Catherine came to us with an open mandate. She said, guys, I need to get to the bottom of this. I think it's going to be a qualitative approach. But that's where I stop. You guys have to help me, and for this, everybody's chasing down the millennials. What is it that we can do to get to this next level down? So we work with Delta across their key markets, the 3 key markets that we'll talk about here today. Brazil, United Kingdom, and China. In each of these markets, if you think back to the previous bit, which is about that anthropology-inspired approach, we just land on the ground and engage in a couple of immersive workshops. Right? As these workshops were progressing, between Catherine and our team, between the Delta team and our team, we would look at people participating in the workshop and say, wouldn't it be interesting to talk to that person and their friends or peers, colleagues, in a setting of their choice? So at the end of the workshop, we'd approach them saying, hey, we really like what you were saying, very interesting views you have on flying and flying habits. Would you be open to coming out and meeting us with a few of your friends, and here's what we'd like to discuss. We're co-opting them in. This is the purpose of the discussion. Would you be open to that? And most of them said, yeah, sure. I have some friends and peers who share that kind of flying lifestyle. But I'll only see you if you meet me at a steakhouse or at a private members club or a tea house. And we said, fine. You tell us. We had to humanize this whole thing, right? We said, fine. We'll come out and see you wherever you feel comfortable. So that's what we did. This is an illustration of what we were doing in China, which was in a turn-of-the-century tea house. We were sitting there. This person who we'd met, who'd been through a qualitative exercise with us, has then curated a session with his friends and peers who share a similar travel history. 3 things here to keep in mind. First, this idea of content. We felt, Catherine's team and our team, as we were watching this discussion unfold, we felt that the tone and texture of the content was really authentic. Friends were acting, if you pardon my French, like bullshit filters. They were really calling out people and saying that you can't say that, that's not true, and that really worked. So there was a great amount of authenticity in terms of the interaction, the content of the discussion. The second thing that we realized was this whole issue of control. Traditionally, in the research respondent dynamic, you want a hierarchy. I ask the questions, you do the answering. We'd done away with that. They had been co-opted into a study design, and they knew what we were seeking to ask, and what they were doing was taking the conversation places where we didn't anticipate it to go, and in a good way, right? So giving up control worked for us on this particular study. And the third thing is context. Repeatedly, we talk about respondents as data points, and at Northstar, we're trying to move away from looking at respondents as mere data points. They're human beings. So it's this strange polarity that on the one hand, you want to understand the truth, but on the other hand, you want to try and take them into a sanitized context. And particularly for the millennials, or for the younger high-value customers, it was important that you gave them a certain comfort of context. So that was the other thing that was. So those things, the content, the control, and the context worked in our favor in this study. And the last thing that we did was, in one of the markets, we took this peer discussion because it was working so well, and then kind of replicated it, but carried those people through into an online forum, which we created, again, working with the Delta team. And that we observed for 4 months. So we wanted to get a longitudinal feel of the stuff that we are doing so that it's not here and now, it's above and beyond that. All of that got aggregated into different types of reports, which we played back to Catherine, and Catherine will tell you what the information's led to inside the business.
Okay, so we were able to, into our core growth markets, really understand where is the Delta brand versus the competitors from that customer's point of view. So we really got a good understanding of what we needed to do and what we were up against. We also really got the core understanding of who they were as business travelers and who they were as leisure travelers, which can often be very different from each other. So we could really understand what products and services do we need to create or improve to really meet those needs. We understood how to communicate with them. That's vastly different, particularly when you go to China, for example. How do we build that communication relationship with them, that one-to-one communication, as well as overall mass communications? So we understood that in the context of each market. And then finally what we did was we understood what the core needs were. And what we've done is we have a set of core needs that are the same for each market, but obviously we are then able to drill down to what's the nuance and what's the difference. So proactivity is one of the needs. And it has some similarities across the markets, and then it has some individual context in the markets. And so we're able to very clearly and easily talk to people around the company with, this is how they're similar, this is how they're different, this is how we can implement something system-wide, and this is where we need to go in and do something tailored and bespoke for these customers. And so that led us, an example of that is 3 of the core needs are care, control, and creativity. Again, just as I was saying, there's a lot that is similar, and I think we have all heard about the millennials, that a millennial in the US it's more similar to a millennial in China than either is to their grandparents. So we definitely saw a lot of similarities, a lot of things that we can, again, just implement. But within each of those, we know in each market, there's also some very individual differences that we'll have to, on a market-by-market level, make sure we implement so that we are best keeping the customer centric as we're developing in our growth markets. And then finally, we're developing a bunch of collateral for across the company, because one of the things about Delta is we're a big company, and so we have to speak to the people who work in the airports, the people who are on the planes, the people that do our marketing communications, the people that handle our reservations. So we have a lot of different stakeholders that we need to talk to, and they want to keep the customer central to their individual work. So we're able to develop those different tools so that they can easily have references of who is this new customer, who am I building my product or service for, and again, we can build it around them so that we can start to build that brand affinity and move it down the old-fashioned funnel to hopefully be the most preferred global airline.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, the lights are too. Okay, we have time for a couple questions, comments. Miles' request, here. Okay, there's come. Thank you. Okay, Nick.
Hi. Are you seeing a trend in actual travel by the millennials increasing? Because I know in the auto industry they've been kind of slow to build, but in the airline industry, are they moving into the market in great numbers fairly quickly?
Yes, they are. What we see, and this is kind of, it's maybe not generational, but obviously as they're entering into sort of the mid-20s, sort of the 25 to 35 is kind of our sweet spot in that generation, and that is where travel starts to ramp up. Again, we're focusing on people who primarily are traveling for business, might be a consultant or someone who travels quite frequently. And so we see that it starts at 25 and it ramps up and it really kind of continues up until 45 and even beyond. So yeah, we're hitting them now as the bulk of them are sort of coming into that professional area where they are frequently traveling.
Here we have two.
I'm Sue Panzer from Horowitz Research, and I thought it was interesting that one of the core attributes that you found out is control. And when you're flying, you don't always have control. So how are you dealing with that?
Yeah, that's a theme across many of our customers, because it's exactly the lack of control. So we know that that's something that they desire. We know there's many things where there's government regulations and such that really take control out of our hands sometimes too. So we do things. It's things like our app. You know, everyone now, you can check in. So you don't have to stand in line at the check-in desk anymore. It's the website. It's what we're really focusing on is a lot of the technology, which is also obviously fitting very much with those millennials, because they say, give me the tools. That's how I'm going to get control. Is you give me the technology and the tools. I'm going to adapt it quickly. I'm going to use it, and then that's going to make me feel better, and we're all going to be happier. So that's one of the pathways that we're working on.
And just to add on the comments that Catherine made, the things that we found out across these markets was, yes, they did express the need for control, but kind of mitigating that could be done easily with information, and the app is just one tool. There are quite a lot of other tools that Delta have at their disposal, which when used as they are doing, can mitigate that issue of control. So they're not flying planes, but they're managing expectations around airport experience.
Okay.
Guy Powell with ProRelevant, and I'll be 2 million miles at the end of June, so looking forward to that, I guess. Actually, my question though is, you know, if you compare the value of let's say a US millennial versus a Chinese or a Brazil, in the US you've got all the intra-country travel, whereas China you really only have back to the US, or Brazil back to the US. How do you value those differently, or do you even look at those differently?
We don't necessarily look at them differently. As I say, we look at it in the context of our objectives for each market, which can be slightly different. But also, to be honest, they are traveling up from Brazil, but then many of them are traveling within the U.S. as well, and the same with China. So we actually do our service serving their needs both from a domestic and that international standpoint. So really the only differences would be more what are our maybe core objectives in that particular market. But we do value them as far as, you know, what are the products and services that we need to build for them. They're valued fairly equally, and there's a lot of similarities as well, so that helps.
Okay. Do we have one more? Would you prefer to go and get a coffee? Well, thank you for a nice presentation, and I think